So don't be afraid to make those mistakes. You got to get debt in order to get ahead. That'd be very expensive wings. Hello and welcome back to another episode of just Personal Finance with Kyle here. And we're going to be talking about a variety of things this episode. One of those things being budgeting tips. Another one is my personal viewpoint on debt. And then we're going to get a little check-in on how my wife and I are progressing through some of our own financial steps over these past few years. So let's just go ahead and get into it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about budgeting tips. And the first one I want to talk about is don't be afraid to make mistakes. A lot of people don't start budgeting because they think that they're going to mess it up and that because of that, they should just not do it altogether. That is the furthest thing from the truth. Your budget is just a plan. You can't predict the future. You don't know what's coming down the road. All you can do is plan out what you do know is coming and operate off of that. And even if you're only 90% accurate on what you actually spent for that particular month, that's a whole lot better than just throwing it up into the air and hoping for the best. So I would highly recommend that you budget even if you think you will be completely off. In fact, if you've never budgeted before, you probably will be off on the first few months. And as you continue to get better at it, your budgets will become more accurate over time. So don't be afraid to make those mistakes because they are learning moments. They are going to help you get better as you go along. The next tip that I have for you is that you need to check in on your plan. It's not enough to just make a plan. You actually have to follow through with the plan. And there's not really a way to follow through unless you go back and check how your progress is throughout the month. So I recommend checking in on your budget at least once a week. We don't need to go crazy here with some of the other channels out there that are, they got spreadsheets everywhere. They've got these complex apps and things, and they're just tracking daily everything that's going on. You don't need to be that hardcore. You just need to check in once a week, log the expenses that you spent for that week, and then kind of decide where you're at. Are you starting to go over in a couple of categories? Are you starting to save money in certain categories and that might help you out with some of your other categories? You're not going to know unless you actually check in. So that would be my next tip there, is to please check in on your budgets and make sure that you're actually following them. Because if you're going over, then that means that's one of those times you need to buckle down and right the ship in the middle of the month. But you're not going to know if you aren't checking in every so often. For my next tip, I would say that you need to be reasonable with your budget. There are a lot of people that when they start budgeting, or even they've been budgeting for a while, they look at their grocery bill and they're not happy with it. And so they say, oh, I'm going to drop that down more. I'm spending $500, $600 a month on groceries. I want to squeeze that down to $300 or something like that. You do need to be reasonable with your lifestyle, how you live, how you operate, and go off of that. Because if you're a big foodie and you have certain things in your diet that are non-negotiable and they also happen to be a little bit pricier, then it doesn't make sense for you to try to squeeze down your bill as low as possible when it may not even be possible to do. So keep that in mind. There's only so much juice you can squeeze out, and at that point you can't go any lower. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your different things. For my wife and I, when we do this, it's not really the grocery bill that's a problem for us. It's our restaurant bill. A lot of times we go over in our restaurant line item. And at first, we used to budget only $30 a month for restaurants, which was not reasonable at all. We assumed we would basically never go out to eat every month. And it just turned out that was not actually happening. There were weekends where we would go out. So we did bump it up to $50, and we're still going over on that. We may have to have a conversation at some point and boost that up a little bit more. But we are much closer to our target than we were when we were saying 30. And that's just one practical example from my life. There are other situations too, where we have to look at the budget and say, you know what, that is just way too low. Diapers and wipes was another one. We were extremely aggressive on that. And the reality is we just couldn't squeeze any more juice out of it. It was what it was, and there wasn't really anything we can do about it. And you're going to have to come to that conclusion yourself as well. There are going to be certain line items that you just can't get them down anymore, and you need to be okay with that. So again, be reasonable with your line items that you're putting into your budget. The last one has to do with line items, and that is you need to be avoiding making your line items too complex or too vague. So a lot of times when people make a budget, they will either want to budget out every little nook and cranny of every single thing they spend. And when you do that, it can feel overwhelming and it can make you want to quit, because then you feel all this paralysis of, oh, I can't buy that because what is my napkin budget? You know, and you start going through and thinking of all these different line items that you have and whether or not you're over or under on them. You don't want too many line items. It needs to be something that is balanced, which then leads me to the other end of it, where some people will take that advice and say, okay, don't make it too complex. And then they make it way too vague. You don't want that either. So let me give an example of that. A lot of people combine their grocery bill and their shopping bill together. And then when they look at their budget, they think that either they're eating too much or they're shopping too much. But the reality is they don't really know because they combined the two together. So you need to make sure that your line items are not so vague that when you're looking at your budget at the end of the month and you're trying to see where either your budget went off or where you can trim down the fat and maybe save more money, you're not going to be able to be informed and know what to do because your line items are way too vague. And one of the main culprits is that grocery line item, where people start buying things because they're at Walmart or some other place. They start buying things that are not actually groceries. You're not eating them. And yet they're being lumped into the grocery bill. And then you're looking at it later and you're saying, man, we really ate that much? No, you didn't really eat that much. You bought toilet paper, or you bought cleaning supplies, or you bought that movie that, I guess people don't really do DVDs anymore, but you bought that movie that was so cheap and you just had to have it. So those things are getting lumped in, and it reduces the clarity and the purpose of what a budget is, which is telling where your money is going. So avoid those two things. Don't make it too complicated to the point where you get paralysis and you don't know if you should buy this item because you're not sure if you budgeted specifically for it. But also don't get too vague to where your plan is useless and you can't gather any real useful information from it. So those are my 4 tips for you today. I'm sure if I can come up with some more, I will include them in a future video. But those are the ones that really just jumped out to me from just having conversations with other people about budgeting, and also just the pitfalls and things that my wife and I went through when we started sitting down and actually budgeting our money to see where it was going, instead of just looking at the end of the month and saying, well, it looks like my balance is higher than it was at the beginning of the month, so I guess we did good. That's not good enough, because you're living essentially paycheck to paycheck at that point. And any little thing could throw off your whole system. So you got a budget. It doesn't take a long time to do. And maybe I'll have a segment about that in the future where I talk about how to budget, but also talk about some of the tools that are out there that you could potentially use. Well, anyway, let's move on to the next segment. The next segment I want to talk about is debt and my personal viewpoint on debt. So a lot of people see debt in one of two lights. They either see it as a tool or they see it as something to avoid at all costs. And as I had mentioned in the previous video that I had recorded, we have been following through sort of the baby steps of Dave Ramsey's plan. And Dave Ramsey is anti-debt. And now my wife and I, we are pushing to become debt-free. We're not necessarily fully anti-debt, but we are pretty close to it, just maybe not as religious about it as Dave Ramsey is. So debt is a tool, and I agree with that. Debt can be used to obtain assets faster. It can get you where you want to go faster. My wife and I wouldn't be in this house right now if we did not take on some debt in order to get here. That is undeniable. We can't, deny that. The thing is, though, people will take that idea and say, well, you got to get debt in order to get ahead in anything. And if you want to obtain anything, you have to have debt. They take that idea and they run with it. And so they start getting debt in everything that they are spending on. And that is a dangerous place to be. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But I also want to talk about some more positives about debt before, I move on to some of the more negative aspects of it. So debt can also be used as leverage. Now, of course, this is something that more wealthy people do. People like me and the regular person aren't necessarily going to be leveraging debt, but I do want to acknowledge that it is there, that you can take a debt and you can leverage that debt to make more money into the future. I mean, some basic examples would be investing into a business. You take out a loan to create a small business with the intention that that business is going to eventually generate more money than what you borrowed in the first place. So it can be a stepping stone or a ladder to get you where you want to go faster. And so that's great. That's great that debt can do that. But there is a dark side to it as well. And like I said, there's some of the risks, like the leverage thing. It sounds great. And there's some YouTubers out there that are amazing about that. And they sound so smart. And they talk about arbitrage. And they talk about how, the percentage differences and investing and all this stuff. And they sound so incredibly smart. But they fail to realize that real life is not a math problem. It's not a math problem you're trying to solve. Real life is messy, unpredictable, and can really mess up your greatest plans. And that's what I get to into this next part. So debt, if you take on too much, but you think in the current moment that you're able to handle it, it can affect your cash flow. So as you are trying to, pay off your bills and things throughout the month, if you've got certain due dates happening, it can mess up your cash flow. And all of a sudden you have to pay the card loan, but now you don't have enough money for groceries or gas or something else like that. Debt, when you take on too much, can interrupt that. And we have to be careful. We can't allow our debts to cause cash flow problems from month to month, from one paycheck to the next paycheck, because that's how you get caught into the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle, because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul and all these things, just trying to stay afloat. And that's what happens when you take on too many debts, even though it sounds like you can pay the monthly payment. I mentioned that debt can help you attain things faster. There's another side to it where debt can actually bind you up as well. Where, sure, you've attained all these things that you want, but now you are slave to the lender. You are slave to those debt payments that you must make every single month. And now you have no money left at the end of the month because you've paid over and over into all of these bills. And because you thought, oh, I can make the payments, I can make all these different payments, then all of a sudden, individually, sure, you could have made all the payments, but when you collectively put them together, all of a sudden now you realize, I can't make these payments. Now I'm deciding whether or not I can eat. Now I'm deciding whether or not I can pay enough for gas to get from place to place, or if I can even enjoy other entertainments and things because I've got so much debt now. We have to be careful of that because debt can bind us up. So even if you're not necessarily against debt, you got to be careful. Do not allow it to become a weight that slows you down instead of speeding you up. Think about it. If you have so much debt that you can't save for retirement, that's a problem. Debt has now slowed you down. If you have so much debt that you can't enjoy other things in life, then that's a problem. Debt is slowing you down. So it's that delicate balance there, if you are going to take on debt, that you need to really avoid it. But like I've said, my wife and I, we're planning on becoming debt-free, so we don't have to worry about this at all. This will not be a concern. Getting to my last point about debt, and that is that it can cause you to spend more than you would have wanted to spend. Now, this isn't just with credit cards, although there are studies out there that show that when you buy with a credit card, you actually spend more money than you would have paid because your brain is saying, oh, this is going to be later on. I don't have to worry about it now. I'm not really spending money at this moment. It'll be spent later. And so because it's tomorrow's problem or future me's problem, we tend to spend a little bit more in stores compared to people who are just using a debit card in store. But it's not just the credit cards that you're spending more money. When you go and take out a loan for a car and you ask somebody, hey, how much money did you spend on that car? Oh, I took out a loan for $20,000 for that car. Okay, so you paid the sticker price of $20,000 on the car, but there's the interest that's being added on. If you are duped into the insurance things, the gap insurance, all that kind of stuff that they have going on in these dealerships and things, you end up paying more like $25,000 to $28,000 for that car by the time you're done with all the payments. Now, would you have gone onto that dealership's lot and paid $28,000 for that car? Probably not. But because the sticker said 20 and you were happy with that and you paid that price, you're thinking you only spent $20,000. The reality is you didn't. You're paying more. So if you have the opportunity to buy a car debt-free, or buy things with cash, it's better to do it that way than to take out a loan. Because no matter what the interest is, if it's 3%, 5%, or whatever, no matter what the interest is, you're paying more than what you agreed to pay. At the end of the day, you are paying more than what you agreed to pay. My wife and I, we spent $110,000 on this house. We're not paying $110,000 for this house. The interest probably makes this house more like $150,000 to $180,000. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. I know the bank had shared a bunch of paperwork and it mentioned that, how much we would have paid in interest after the full, realization of the loan. But I can't remember that off the top of my head right now. But anyway, it's going to be a much higher number. But anyway, the point is that I feel like there's a lot of things that people wouldn't buy if they truly knew how much they were going to spend on that item, instead of just looking at the sticker that is on the item. Okay, So as you can see, debt, not really a fan of it. And I had mentioned, I think in the previous video, that I don't plan on getting any more car loan payments and things like that. So we're trying to pay off that student loan debt that I had mentioned previously and try to avoid ever going back into debt from that point forward. So moving on to my last thing, which happens to be about our progress and how we've been doing. I alluded to that our debt journey last time, that we had been paying off different debts and things, and we kind of had to get ourselves in order when it comes to budgeting and when it comes to being on the same page and even knowing what our goals were, what we wanted to accomplish and get done. So we have been very slow to go through these baby steps. We have not, like I said, we have been following the Dave Ramsey plan, but not to a T. If we were doing the Dave Ramsey plan to a T, Dave Ramsey would probably have expected us to be out of debt within a year or two. We've been married now for 5. And we started doing this probably around the time my son Caspian was born. So he's 3 now. So about 3, maybe 4 years ago, we started hearing about his baby steps and things. So we've been very slow to get through step 2. Now, step 1, we got that done real quick because we're more frugal people. So we already had essentially $1,000 to put away into an emergency fund. That was not a big deal for us at all. But because of just all the different things of life, first of all, we added debts with our kids being born and, the hospital bills that go with that. And then, of course, we were paying off other debts, such as the rings that I had to buy for the wedding. That was $3,000 just for my wife's rings. Well, not wings. That'd be a very expensive wings. So anyway, it's been very slow. It's been very slow trying to get through it. And hopefully by May, we're able to get the last of our debts paid off. It also happens to be one of our bigger ones. And then we'll be debt-free besides the mortgage and about 4-year-long journey to get to that point. Our intentions after getting through step 2 is to go on to step 3, which is to save 3 to 6 months of our living expenses. The issue that we're coming up with right now is that we're probably going to have to take that step much slower, and we won't be able to be as aggressive as we are right now with trying to pay off this debt because of the fact that we have some other things, big ticket items that we're trying to save for. Remember, I mentioned we do not want to get into another car payment or anything like that. But we need a vehicle with a 3rd row because we eventually want to have a 3rd kid. So our plans have always been to have about 3 kids. And in order to do that, we need to get rid of either our Sentra or our Impala because it's going to be a little bit cramped back there trying to put 3 car seats back there. So 3rd row vehicles are not cheap. Even the used ones are $10,000 plus to buy. So in order to make that work, we're going to have to put more emphasis on that and less emphasis on step 3. We'll probably be putting in a monthly amount. We haven't set that number yet because we haven't got there yet, but a monthly amount toward our savings account to build up that emergency fund while at the same time setting aside money for the vehicle that we eventually want to get as well. So that's kind of the future as to what we're going to be doing after this point. We're currently in step 2, which is paying off your debts besides your house. Step 3 would be to get 3 to 6 months of savings up for emergencies. We'll probably shoot for 3 and then move on from there. We've been, again, like I said, Dave Ramsey-ish here. We've been continuing to invest even while we've been paying off debts. We've been doing all these things, still investing. And not only have I been investing in retirement through this whole thing, but I've also been investing money into our kids' 5 to 9 plans for college. So we have not put those things on hold like Dave Ramsey normally advises you to do. And mostly the reason why we chose to do that was because those investing years are extremely valuable. I'm currently 31. And so if you take back just 3-4 years ago when I really started to invest more in retirement, I was 27. Those are very valuable years to be investing into the stock market because those dollars early on see the greatest return compared to later on. So I wasn't really willing to give up those investing opportunities, but I didn't invest at 15% like step 4 says to do in the Dave Ramsey plan. I was investing at closer to like 10% or so. So that was a little bit different compared to what he normally wants you to do. So I would say that probably sums up the progress that we have made through the baby steps. Now, of course, after that point, according to Dave Ramsey, the rest of the baby steps are kind of just in whatever order you wish to do, which again is investing, paying off the house, building more wealth, those sorts of things. We're not there yet, but I'll talk more about that when we maybe get closer to that stage. So I'm going to probably be wrapping up this video right here. If you have any topics or thoughts on the topics that we did talk about today, go ahead and let me know down in the comments below. And if you like this video, maybe you should like it, because then maybe other people would also like it. Who knows? Thank you for watching till the end. I greatly appreciate that, and I will see you guys on the next one.